My parents were artists. My father, an actor on Broadway, my mother, a symphony cellist. Much changed with World War II when both joined the service. My father fought in the US military in Asia, while my mother served in US intelligence in both Canada and in the United States. After the war, rather than returning to their artistic careers on the stage, they were recruited to work in the burgeoning field of television broadcasting. The development of television in the US had been halted during the war. By the early mid-50s, the demand for television broadcasting was at a fevered pitch, and people like my parents were part of a very exciting time in North America, during which they were pioneering what quickly became the most important communication tool since the printing press. This is both the era and the environment into which I was born. I was virtually raised on the floor of a network television studio. By the time my parents had been asked to relocate to the Midwest, as a child, they were actually producing a new show called the Ozark Jubilee. It was the crossover chart cousin of the Grand Ole Opry, which is the longest-running country music series on network television, and regularly featured in those days some of the nation's biggest stars, Patsy Cline, Johnny Cash, Red Foley, launching the careers of young musicians like Brenda Lee. The Jubilee brought country music to new audiences across the country in small towns and throughout the growing American suburbs, and gave exposure to many country music artists, especially women, who might not have otherwise had such remarkable careers. During this era, while people across North America were experiencing a new level and a new kind of communication that brought them closer to each other and to the experiences of people from far-flung towns and cities of the globe. As a society, we were also swept up in the ambitions of a rapidly changing world, a world bursting with innovation. The first electric power for an American reactor was realized. Automation in the automobile industry was beginning. A bubble chamber for tracking electrically charged particles was created. A heart-lung machine was first used on a human. Solar batteries were unveiled. The invention of a laser, transistor radios, all of these were introduced. Stereo recording technology and the hi-fi, the first vertical takeoff and landing of a jet aircraft, the first supersonic flight of the military, and the space race, and the list goes on and on and on. And for me, as a young child, growing up in that television broadcast studio, swept up in the zeitgeist of this era, I actually thought my parents teleported people. 50 years after the pioneering inventions of the 60s, I take our need and ability to innovate quite seriously. When I was a teenager and it came time to select where I went to university, my family and I chose the Kansas City Art Institute, which was one of the leading art schools of the day. I had a predilection for making things. I loved to do that. And KCAI had an inspiring history and story that included some of the most notable 20th century artists, Robert Rauschenberg, Dennis Hopper. But as my freshman year got underway, I found that I was not the most motivated student. My professors were really concerned that my head was always in the clouds, and I wasn't taking my classical drawing courses very seriously. I thought I already knew what they were trying to teach me, and not too pleased with my lack of effort, the institution had a solution for students like myself. I, along with a handful of other problem students, were loaded onto a yellow school bus and driven 300 miles into western Kansas, where they dropped us off individually at 10-mile increments with nothing but a big box full of art supplies, a 3-gallon jug of water, and enough food to last 6 to 12 hours. So I found myself alone in the blazing hot sun with the following problem to solve. This was the exercise. They said, if you want to be a painter, make a perfect line. If you want to be a sculptor, make a perfect moment. And so, of course, I'm thinking, I'm pretty good at anything that they had thrown at me. And I thought the very first thing that I should do is take a nap. Hours later, I awoken, dazed and sunburned on one side, and I think I had a panic attack. They're going to be here any minute, and I have nothing to show for it. Fearing an unceremonious exit from art school and imagining myself destitute and homeless, I had an impulse, and I started to dig a hole. But what I did is I laid my big jug of water in the hole, I cut its top off, I made a pond. I cut a length of wheat from the field and I split it down the center and I opened it like a raft. I placed it on the surface of the water for it to float. and I found in my art bin box a large darning needle. And I took the magnet that we used to pick up all of our push pins, and I quickly rubbed it, and I magnetized it. I laid it on the surface of the water. So what had I done? I had made a compass. Not long thereafter, the bus comes rolling in. The students and the senior faculty all piled out, and this includes some of the most renowned artists in the world. They come down and they look into the hole and the puddle of water that I had, and not one single person says one word. Nothing. They walk back to the bus, shaking their heads, realizing that if some of you are scientists, and you know anything about Faraday lines and magnetic fields, right? I had actually created a perfect line that unerringly circumscribed the globe, 24,000 miles in circumference. And I had projected all future lines, right, because of the Faraday fields. And for those of you who are really physicists and engineers and you know a bit about tensor fields, et cetera, I had also made a perfect moment because the magnetic field around the Earth is always in a state of becoming and therefore never really is. It's a perfect moment. And so maybe on the surface I looked to them a little bit like a genius, but inside, rather than returning to school as the prodigal student, I recognized, right, very quickly that I had approached the assignment entirely on impulse. I asked myself, what just happened? Can I rely on that? Can I understand that? Can I build on that? Can I share that? Can I turn that not just into a practice, but a philosophy? One of the men on the bus was the famous sculptor Dale Eldred, and afterwards he invited me to be a part of his team of studio assistants. I was one of just 15 assistants who worked with Dale while I was still at university. We were expected to wear military-style uniforms. We traveled in semi-tractor trailers with bunk beds on the inside, nailed up, and you never knew what was coming next. One morning, there was a bang, 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 bang on my hotel door, a huge cacophony outside in the parking lot, and unbeknownst to us, there was a helicopter and parkas. And they simply threw us inside, and we all jumped on board to a remote location to work on an entirely new work. On another occasion, we were coming back from Las Vegas, and because I had grown up in farm country, it's not uncommon to learn how to drive a tractor or a truck at a very young age, and so I was always given the job of driving. On this particular occasion, when we stopped at the gas station in the middle of the Utah desert, and when I came out of the bathroom all cleaned up and ready again, they were all gone. This is long before cell phones, right? And knowing that the trucks had 2 gas tanks welded on, this meant that they could go for 1,500 miles before they ever noticed I was gone without stopping. So I was pretty much on my own. Again, another impulse. I took a quarter out of my pocket, and I put it in one of those little gumball novelty machines with the hope that it would spit out something that might be useful, like a compass or a miniature flashlight, or maybe even an amulet like a yo-yo or a temporary tattoo, something that would resonate with me or give me a direction. However, when I put the quarter in, out popped a 1-inch square Bible. It wasn't a religious epiphany. But I was in the middle of the desert, alone, having spent the last months, if not years, with a man who was a towering figure that required an army of people to realize works on a monumental scale. And in contrast, I held in one hand a monumental work that had transformed the world for thousands of years. It was so tiny. I took it up in my hand. I stood out on the highway. It was freezing cold, and the sun was coming up. And I thought, actually, of Archimedes. He explained the principle of the lever. Give me a proper fulcrum and a lever and a place to stand, and I shall move the world. In that moment, I realized I no longer wanted to make objects and images like my art school colleagues, because at most, they would only just be beautiful representations of my imagination, never the thing itself, the thing that I actually wanted to create. Even if I was very good at it and had been so since I was very young, nothing I could ever draw, paint, build would ever be what I wanted it to be. It would always fall short of what I imagined. The creative media and the environment of how we were educated from an art school point of view were just insufficient. But I did understand that the basic knowledge used to express and explore the frontiers of physics, engineering, cosmology, astronomy, neuroscience could possibly helped me accomplish what it was that I imagined. So from that point, I established a very different path for myself, one that relied not just on artistic impulse, but truly on creative discipline and on ingenuity. That path inspired me to be part of the first generation of the Media Lab at MIT. And this is where I developed my practice as an artist-engineer hybrid. It inspired me to create a new generation of works at this intersection of art, science, and engineering, and eventually, of course, inspired me to come to Canada and to become the dean of the School of the Arts, Media Performance and Design, or as we affectionately call it, AMPD. When I think about the things we're able to do in AMPD and at York University, frankly, overall, I go back to my early years. I was a product of an era and of an environment. The 60s, an era of astonishing revolutions and inventions, and an environment, the television studio, where teleportation of a kind was already happening. The two are, of course, interwoven. Fast forward to 2016, earlier this month, Guy Dixon wrote a piece in the Globe and Mail which he asserted that art schools are setting the pace and preparing today's innovators. He called art schools the font of ideas, business incubators. And why is that? And how do we take what is inherently in a creative environment, like an art school or even a TV studio for that, and look at it in such a way as to realize on a broad scale a sustainable culture of creativity that permeates a workplace, a city, and a society? Though the goals, the historical needs, and philosophical foundation of each new enterprise that I've created and led during the past 25 years are highly individual, they all share a common thread. They harness the enormous potential for creative discovery, scholarly research, and the cultural invention uniquely found at the collaborative intersection of art, science, and engineering. Their particular success emerges from working closely with stakeholders to develop strategic vision, distinctive identities, and cultures of creativity, respecting and supporting the disciplinary rigor of each participating discipline, but boldly pioneering new propositions between them. That nurtures, of course, interdisciplinary daring, collaboration, innovation, sustainability, engagement, and excellence, and all with an increased awareness of global reach and ethical impact. I mentioned earlier my own hybrid art, science, and engineering practice, and I thought I would share just a little bit of that with you. My studio has no brushes. There's no canvases, no easels, but rather unmistakably, it's a research lab. It's packed with computers, electronics, robotic arms, isolation tables, lasers, optics, oscilloscopes, circuit board printers, microscopes, high-speed cameras, microarray readers, laboratory freezers, and a very long list. A project that I created in 2004 is a neuroprosthetic that triggers electrophosphenes by subcutaneous stimulation of the retina using radio waves recorded from distant pulsars. The project explores the information encoded in celestial systems and creates a cosmologically scaled experimental work of art in the mind's eye of the viewer. Most of you, when you were kids, remember when you press your hands on your eyes and you get that fascinating pattern of light? Those are sodium and potassium ions that cascade down the optic nerve. The brain sort of converts it into something that's visual, right? We think it's light. Well, these phosphenes are patterns of light that we experience in a lot of different situations, from when we close our eyes tightly or when we adapt to darkened rooms. But electrophosphenes are a method of electrically reproducing the same neurological effect, but with greater range of visual patterns, color subtlety, and precision. The electrophosphenes in Altamira are created by placing a miniature set of electrodes on the temples and behind the ears, and then applying a very tiny voltage, just 1 volt at 1 milliampere current, that's actually modulated by multiplexed pulsar signals, about 25 million light years away at frequencies between typically 5 to 100 hertz, right? This is not a screen. This is in your head. Pulsars are rapidly rotating cores of collapsed stars, and these dense, tiny stars have strong magnetic fields that emit focused beams of radio energy. As the pulsar quickly rotates, its radio beacon sweeps like a lighthouse in space, and each time these beams pass a radio telescope, an electromagnetic pulse can be detected. Emergency is designed for the world premiere of the European Union's 2012 Capital of Culture exhibition. Clones, fragments of ancient ice core samples taken from northern hemisphere glaciers that are rapidly disappearing due to global climate change. The project Voltaire uses ultra-pure water and modified nanoengineering techniques employed in semiconductor manufacturing. Voltaire creates a series of thin section ice crystals cloned from glaciers that covered Europe 20,000 years ago during the last glacial maximum. Most of you know that no two snowflakes are alike. Your parents told you that, right? That's true. In nature, they can't be. But in a laboratory, no one had ever thought that you could actually copy them. What we do with ultra-pure water, when all the impurities are removed, as a consequence, the freezing temperature of water drops from 0 Celsius to minus 41 Celsius. Colder than that, it homogeneously nucleates. Above that temperature, however, ultra-pure water can't freeze. It doesn't know how. By strictly controlling its environment, it can be held in an unfrozen, almost sub-freezing state of suspended animation. However, by carefully doping ultra-pure water and ultra-cold water with a microscopic fragment of ancient ice, the unfrozen water uses the crystal pattern that's introduced like a blueprint to freeze from, creating a kind of poetic time machine. It makes copies of ice that are not 20,000 years old, but 20,000 years ago. In conversations with our students, there's a growing realization that the majority of the jobs they will hold in the future are yet to be invented. It's clear we must provide them foundational training, opportunities to develop critical and entrepreneurial thinking, and professional opportunities to expand their capacity to succeed. Along with preparing them for the practical challenges of their careers ahead, we must strive to educate our students continually to pioneer new creative opportunities that will advance their dreams, feed the frontiers of our imaginations, and support the evolution of these dramatic new industries. Creativity is the new transferable skill. It's an asset that's in critical demand across countless industries and sectors, and we simply cannot ignore it. However, creativity is the art of the disciplined imagination, and creativity is the natural terrain of AMPD, and we're preparing our students to pioneer and define the outermost edges of that terrain, and together, with them, with all of us, we will define the future.